Good morning! Today we're doing something really fun. I'm making bone broth. It's already in the crock pot. Shockingly, I forgot to film an intro, but we're here now. It's my first time making bone broth. So it's either gonna fail and we're all just gonna learn together, or it's gonna go amazing and be perfect and jiggly and beautiful. And if that's the case, I will give you a step-by-step perfect tutorial on everything I did to achieve this, with every single step and everything I used. But we're just gonna have to wait and see. It's only been in here for about 4 hours. I think it's going well, but I don't really know. So I will check back in periodically, and in the meantime, let's go ahead and get started. Before starting on this journey, I did a ton of research, and it seems like you need 3 main things to make a good quality bone broth. Some sort of marrow bones. I'm using beef marrow bones that I got at my local Asian market. Alongside your marrow bones, you also want to snag a pack of duck or chicken feet. Now, you don't absolutely have to do this, but adding them gives the broth that jiggly, gelatinous texture that we're looking for. This is because feet are high in collagen, but they're also high in glucosamine and chondroitin, which makes them excellent for promoting healthy hips and joints. They're also much more cost effective, so swapping out a few marrow bones for some duck or chicken feet will help keep the overall cost down. Before I move on to the third essential item, when it comes to flavors or additions to your bone broth, you can basically add whatever pet-safe ingredients you want. I decided to add in an apple, of course without the seeds or the core, a few king oyster mushrooms, some dried vegetables, and about half a can of pumpkin puree. I know a few of you are probably freaking out about the mushrooms, but I promise they're not only safe for cats and dogs, they're actually very healthy and beneficial. There's a ton of different things you can add into bone broth to add some extra flavor or benefits, but you can also just leave it alone. You definitely don't have to add anything if you don't want to. As for the last essential ingredient, I'm realizing now I probably should have said there were 4 essential ingredients, but I'll get to the 4th one here in a second, because the 3rd one is water. I know it feels obvious, but you not only need to add enough water to cover everything in your crock pot, I would specifically recommend using filtered water if at all possible. Using filtered water brings in a couple of benefits, but mainly it helps you to avoid excess impurities like chlorine, heavy metals, or potential contaminants that might be present in tap water. Using filtered water also results in a better taste because we've filtered out the chemicals like chlorine, which can alter the flavor. And you're helping to protect the nutrients that are extracted during the slow cooking process. So using filtered water is definitely something I would recommend if you can do it. Once I had everything in my crock pot, I gave it a little bit of a mix, but this isn't necessary because you're going to be letting this simmer on low for 24 hours. So within that time, everything will just kind of meld together, and you're going to give it a couple mixes here and there, so you didn't have to do this if you don't want to. I put the crock pot over in this little corner of my kitchen, plugged her in, put her on low, and now we're just gonna leave her alone for the next few hours. Well, I said we were gonna leave her alone for the next few hours, but I forgot to do something. About an hour in, I realized I forgot the apple cider vinegar, so I had to add that in, and this is that 4th ingredient that I definitely think is necessary. Apple cider vinegar is good for digestive health, it helps to extract nutrients, and enhances the collagen release. So even though some people will say it's not necessary, I'm definitely team apple cider vinegar, but I turned around to realize that milkshake is just team licking marrow bones until they're clean. So it's only been like 4 hours, and my house doesn't smell like a beautiful fall amazing bone broth paradise yet, but I also could just be nose blind to it, so I'll update you and let you know when my house starts to smell amazing. In the meantime, dare I say I think this is gonna be really good. It's my first time making bone broth. Oh, I just hit my elbow. It's my first time making bone broth, so I might eat those words. But as of right now, I'm feeling weirdly confident. I'm so excited. I really think this is gonna be good. At the 4-hour mark, I was definitely feeling confident, as you just saw, and I was starting to get excited because things were starting to cook down. Ooh, it's starting to get funny. Okay, it's starting to look different. I'm gonna give it a little bit of a stir. You don't really have to stir it, but just to kind of, I don't know. It makes me feel better to stir it. It does smell good. I just can't smell it like throughout the house yet. So I think we're gonna get there in the next few hours. So it's doing good. I will check in another 4 hours, which will be at around 7. We'll just see how it's going. Eventually it's gonna get dark and less aesthetic in here. Ignore my camera stand. Anyway, I'll check in a few hours. It's 10 p.m., which means the bone broth has been going for about 10 hours, if my math is correct, and we're gonna hit the halfway point at around midnight. So this is our last check-in before I go to bed, and I will see you again in the morning, because I will certainly be asleep once we hit that 12-hour point, and 12 hours is the minimum amount of time you wanna go for bone broth. I'm gonna take it to the full 24 just to give it the best chance I possibly can, because I'm still concerned I somehow messed this up. Also, please ignore Dish Mountain over here. My dishwasher randomly started leaking today, so I'm gonna be hand washing dishes for the next few days until we can figure out what's wrong. Anyway, let's check on our bone broth. I'm still very optimistic. She's looking amazing, but my apartment never started smelling like the beautiful, soupy fall paradise that I thought we would achieve by making bone broth in a slow cooker or a crock pot. By the way, thank you, Erica, for letting me borrow your crock pot. Mine is in storage, and I'm not going in there because it is an absolute disaster, and I don't want to mess with that. Anyway, let's check on the bone broth and see how she's doing, and then I will check back with you in the morning. The 10-hour mark is when things really started to look different. She was definitely not as cute anymore, and things were starting to get a little bit gross, but that's good because that means everything is going exactly the way it's supposed to. Everything was starting to get all mushy and kind of disgusting, and the feet were literally starting to disintegrate into nothing. But that's, again, exactly what we're looking for. It's looking so good. I will see you guys in the morning. Good morning. It's about 9:30, which means we hit the 21-hour mark, and I haven't looked at her yet. I think she's doing well just from like peeking in the glass, but I haven't opened her. I wanted to wait and do the reveal with you guys for the morning. I have a feeling the duck feet and the apples are just gonna turn to mush the second that I stir it, which although is kind of gross, it's also exactly what we want. And by the way, my house does finally smell like a beautiful soupy fall paradise. I woke up at like 2 or 3 in the morning to use the bathroom and was immediately met with that beautiful aroma. So it does happen. It just took way longer than I thought that it would. So let's take a peek at her. I'm gonna give her a little bit of a stir, and then Holly and I are gonna leave the house. We're gonna go get brunch because otherwise I will just keep messing with it, and I really wanna let it sit the full 24 hours and give it the best chance that it can. It smells so good. It looks disgusting, but it smells really good. I just splashed it everywhere. Oh God. Yeah, look. This was originally a duck foot, so we're definitely doing everything that we want to be doing. This is good enough, but I am gonna let it go for the next 3 hours and just see what happens. Okay, so I'm gonna cover her back up, and I'm gonna go get something to eat because my stomach is audibly growling, and I'll check back in a few hours. There's a little restaurant nearby that has a dog menu, so I love taking Holly here for some quality time. I also have the most amazing fruit bowl, so I always snag it at brunch, and of course a kid's taco because I'm a little bit of a picky eater. Since we were away at brunch, I figured the chicken and egg scramble was the way to go for Holly. She loves eggs and chicken, so it seemed like a win-win, but of course I let it cool down before I gave it to her. After brunch, we had officially hit the 24-hour mark, but in all transparency, I was feeling a little bit discouraged because it looked kind of gross. Regardless of how it looked, I knew that the next step was to take out all of the larger pieces of bone and fruit and then strain what was left. I also missed a step here. You are supposed to let the bone broth cool a little bit before straining it. This is mostly for safety. It also allows the fat to start to separate so you can skim off some excess fat before straining, which makes the straining process easier. However, I kind of messed up the straining process in general. Luckily, it didn't mess up my bone broth completely, but it's a change I'll make next time. The This pile of naked bones and mush is what was left of all the beautiful ingredients we started with. Okay, so back to the mistake that I made. I poured my bone broth through this little mesh strainer just to take out any of the larger chunks. I don't own a cheesecloth, and I figured using something like a coffee filter would take forever, so I skipped this step altogether, and that was definitely a mistake. I mentioned this a little bit later, but because I skipped a secondary straining process through something like a cheesecloth, I end up with two very distinct textures in my bone broth. Next time I won't be skipping the cheesecloth step, and I've already ordered one because this will help remove even the tiniest particles, resulting in a more clear and smooth broth. It also helps to make sure your bone broth is completely safe to consume because it ensures there's no tiny bone fragments remaining anywhere in the broth.
I can't believe I'm saying this, but we're officially on day 3 of making bone broth. I thought this was gonna be a 24-hour experience. It's now been a 36-hour experience, but it should be fully cooled. It's been in the fridge for almost a day, like 3/4 of a day. So there's a fat layer on top. I haven't pulled it out of the fridge. We need to scrape that fat layer off and see if she turned out jiggly and perfect and amazing. I'm very excited, but also very nervous. We're in the literal home stretch now. I know I said that before, but now we're in the home stretch. So let's go see how she looks. Can I just... You know, I never wear gloves ever for anything, and this is the one time I kind of wish I had gloves. Ooh. Oh! Okay. I'm gonna put this in a baggie before I throw it away because, you know, ew. Oh my god! I think I did it! Let's see.
Okay, future me interjecting here, just in case I don't actually show a better clip of this, you can see the two distinct color and texture layers of the bone broth on my spoon. This is what I was talking about as the result of skipping the fine cheesecloth strain. The more opaque bottom layer has a ton more sediment that would have been pulled out if I would have done a secondary strain. When I noticed this, I reached out to a bunch of people in the community, and everyone came back saying it was probably safe to feed, including multiple professional chefs. However, because I knew that my strainer wasn't super fine, I still knew there was a risk of there being some tiny bone fragments left behind, so I chose not to feed that bottom layer. I'm to learn that there's always going to be some sort of heavier sediment layer no matter how fine of a strain you can get. However, if I would have used something like a cheesecloth, I would feel more comfortable feeding this layer because there's no possible way there could be some bone fragment left behind, but for now, I'm just going to toss it and we'll make that change for next time. Anyway, back to me being excited that I successfully made bone broth.
Oh my god, I made bone broth! Look at that! One more thing I want to try before I leave for church. I want to put a little bit of it in a glass dish that is microwave safe, obviously, because I know that this should turn back into a broth instead of the goo. So let's try that. I'm gonna get a little dish. Look, it's a liquid. This is amazing. Obviously, I was very proud of myself, and I still am, but of course I had to let our sous chef give it a try to see if our first attempt was Holly approved. I'm not really sure if all the extra things I added affected the flavor all that much, but I choose to believe that this is the moment Holly fully embraced the fall season. I'm happy to report that the bone broth is definitely Holly approved, and I'm already excited to make my next batch. While I feed my pets, let's recap how I semi-successfully made my first batch of bone broth. First of all, I borrowed a crock pot, but you can also use an Instapot or make it on the stovetop. The time it simmers will just be slightly different. For my base, I used a combination
combination of marrow bones and duck feet, and for inclusions you can use anything that's pet safe. Don't forget to add in a couple tablespoons of apple cider vinegar and then cover everything with filtered water. Then put my crock pot on low and let it simmer for 24 hours, stirring occasionally. When your 24 hours is up, turn off your crock pot and let it cool for a little bit before removing all of the larger debris that's left over. When it comes to your strain, don't forget to do at least one secondary strain. You want to use a fine mesh strainer to get the larger fragments left behind, and then you want to strain it at least one more time through something like a cheesecloth to filter out any remaining smaller sediment. I left my bone broth to cool in the refrigerator for about 18 hours and then pulled the fat layer off. I chose not to keep the heavy sediment layer for safety on this particular batch, but typically if you go through multiple strains, what's left will be safe to feed. And there you have it. That's how I made bone broth for the first time. So if you've been on the fence about making bone broth at home, I highly recommend it. It actually ended up being pretty easy, and even though I did make a couple of mistakes, there's not a difficult learning curve to it either. My pets are both very familiar with bone broth. Even though they've never had a gelatinous homemade version of it before, I didn't feel that there was a need to ease them into this. Luckily, they both eat pretty diverse diets on a regular basis, so this didn't upset their stomach. But if your pets have never had bone broth before, I recommend giving it to them just a little bit at a time, the same way you would with anything else that's new. This experience was amazing, and luckily, both of my pets absolutely loved the bone broth. I gave them both a version that was heated up to use as a hydration, and some that was still cold and jiggly to see if they had a preference. And as you'll see in a minute, they both lick their bowls completely clean, so I think it's safe to say that they don't really care how I give it to them, they just really like the bone broth. Please let me know in the comments any tips or recommendations you guys have for my next batch, and thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.